You know, when you sit behind that desk in the Oval Office, there are mornings when you wake up and the first call you get isn't about your agenda. It's about something one of your allies just did that changes everything. And I can tell you from experience, the calls that worried me most weren't the ones about our adversaries. It was when a friend started pulling away. Now look, what's happening right now between the United States and Spain, I want you to really sit with this for a moment, because it's not just another headline. Spain, a NATO ally, a country that has stood alongside us in one form or another for decades, has closed its airspace to American military aircraft involved in operations against Iran. Not a rival, not an adversary, an ally, shutting its skies to us. Let me tell you something. That doesn't happen in a vacuum. Countries don't take steps like that to score political points. They do it when they believe something has gone fundamentally wrong with how a war is being conducted, how decisions are being made, and how their sovereignty is being treated in the process. And here's what most people aren't paying attention to yet. Spain isn't alone in this feeling. They're just the ones saying it the loudest. And we'll come back to that in a moment, because that part of the story is where things start to get really complicated. But first, let's talk about how we got here, because the road from February 28th to today, March 30th, tells you everything you need to know about what happens when America goes to war without bringing its friends along for the conversation. Now, to understand what Spain just did, you've got to understand the last 31 days. On February 28th, the United States launched Operation Epic Fury alongside Israel's Operation Roaring Lion, a coordinated military campaign against Iran. Nearly 900 strikes in the first 12 hours alone. That is a massive escalation, and it happened fast. Within days, the world started reacting. Spain's Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, was one of the first leaders to speak up, calling the war, and I'm quoting him directly, illegal, reckless, and unjust. Now, you can agree or disagree with that characterization, but when a sitting NATO prime minister uses those words publicly, that tells you something about where the diplomatic groundwork was before the first bomb dropped. By March 2nd, Spain denied the U.S. use of the Rota and Morón de la Frontera air bases, bases we've jointly operated for years. 15 KC-135 refueling planes had to be relocated to France and Germany. And how did the White House respond? President Trump said Spain had been terrible and threatened to cut off all trade with Madrid. And we've got to remember, that's not diplomacy. That's coercion directed at a friend. And Sanchez didn't back down. He went on national television, reflected on Iraq, on Gaza, on Ukraine, and said his government's position could be summed up in 3 words: no to war. And now on March 30th, Spain has gone further, closing its entire airspace to U.S. military flights connected to Iran. That's not a symbolic gesture. That's an operational disruption with real consequences. And this is where things start to get complicated. So let's be precise about what actually happened here, because the details matter. Defense Minister Margarita Robles confirmed that Spain has closed its airspace to all U.S. aircraft involved in the Iran war. Foreign Minister Jose Manuel Alvarez said the goal was, and I want you to hear this carefully, not to do anything that could encourage an escalation. That's a sovereign nation making a deliberate, principled, operational decision. Now, what does that mean practically? Some of the bombers involved in Operation Epic Fury, B-2s, B-52s, are stationed at RAF Fairford in the UK. Those planes now have to bypass the entire Iberian Peninsula. They're either flying out over the eastern Atlantic or routing through French airspace. That adds time, fuel, complexity, and cost to every single sortie. Spanish newspaper El País reported that aircraft can only transit Spanish airspace in case of emergency. Every other flight plan related to Iran has been rejected, including refueling missions. Now, here's the honest truth. This isn't without precedent, but it's rare. France and Italy blocked U.S. overflights during the 1986 Libya strikes under Reagan. Turkey refused ground access for the 2003 Iraq invasion. But in both of those cases, the conflicts hadn't yet begun or were single operations. What we're seeing now is an ally shutting its doors during an active, ongoing, month-long war. That is a different magnitude entirely. And when NATO was asked to comment, they declined, referred questions to national authorities. Let me tell you, when NATO goes quiet on a rift between two member states during a shooting war, that silence speaks volumes about just how fractured things have become. Now look, I want to be fair here. Whoever sits in that office faces pressures that nobody on the outside fully understands. I know that. But leadership is about the decisions you make before the crisis, not just during it. And this is where I have serious concerns. When the White House was asked about Spain's airspace closure, an official told the BBC that the U.S. military was meeting or surpassing all of its goals under Operation Epic Fury and does not need help from Spain or anyone else. Let me tell you something. In 40 years of public life, I have never seen a statement like that strengthen America's position. That's not confidence. That's isolation wearing the mask of strength. When I was dealing with Kosovo in 1999, we spent months building the coalition before a single sortie flew. We brought NATO together, we listened to objections, we made compromises, and when the operation began, it was a genuine alliance effort. Was it slower? Yes. Was it messier? Absolutely. But when it was over, the alliance was stronger, not weaker. What happened here is the opposite. Operation Epic Fury launched with Israel, and then the administration expected allies to fall in line after the fact. When Spain said no, the reflex wasn't to persuade, it was to punish. We're going to cut off all trade with Spain. That was the president's response, said right there in the Oval Office next to the German chancellor. Here's the honest truth. You cannot bully your friends into a war they believe is illegal and then act surprised when they start closing their doors. Alliances are built on trust, and trust is built on consultation, not commands. And that failure didn't start on March 30th. It started the day the bombs fell without the conversation ever happening. Now, I told you we'd come back to something, and this is it. Spain isn't alone. They're just the ones who said it first and said it loudest. When the strikes began on February 28th, the Washington Post reported that key European allies immediately stressed their forces did not participate in the attack. Think about that. Our closest partners in the world felt the need to publicly distance themselves from us on day one. When Trump asked European nations to help reopen the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's oil supply normally flows, the response from multiple capitals was 3 words: not our war. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte urged more European engagement. The response was tepid at best. The Council on Foreign Relations described Europe's reaction as disjointed. And that's the polite version of what's actually happening, which is a slow-motion fracturing of the most successful military alliance in human history. Let me tell you something. I spent 8 years strengthening that alliance, and presidents before me spent decades doing the same. NATO isn't a service contract where you send an invoice and expect compliance. It's a barn raising. You show up for your neighbor because they showed up for you. But if you burn that trust down, if you start wars without asking, threaten trade when they object, and dismiss their concerns publicly, they won't be there when it's your barn that needs building. And here's what worries me most. The Strait of Hormuz is effectively closed. Oil prices are surging. Iran is warning against a ground invasion. And America is conducting the largest military operation in a generation, with fewer allies than at any point since the Second World War. That's not strength. That's strategic loneliness. And strategic loneliness, in my experience, is where the most dangerous miscalculations begin. Now, there's another dimension to this that I don't think enough people are talking about. And that's what all of this means back home. See, when your allies start refusing to participate in your war, it doesn't just create a military problem, it creates a political one. Because the American people are watching, and they're asking a very reasonable question. If this war is just, if this war is necessary, if this war is being conducted the right way, then why are our friends walking away from it? That question has weight, and it gains more weight every single day that oil prices keep climbing because the Strait of Hormuz is effectively shut down. American families are feeling that at the gas pump right now. They're feeling it in grocery prices. They're feeling it in the cost of heating their homes. And when the economic pain of a war arrives at your kitchen table, the politics of that war change very quickly. Now look, Prime Minister Sanchez's vocal opposition also does something else. It gives political cover. It gives cover to other European leaders who have been quietly uncomfortable but afraid to speak up. And it gives cover to domestic critics on both sides of the aisle who are starting to ask hard questions about congressional authorization. This war is now 31 days old. The debate about its legality under both international law and our own Constitution isn't going away. It's growing. Here's what I learned in my years in office. You can sustain a military operation without Allied support for a while, but you cannot sustain it without public support forever. And public support erodes fastest when people see the rest of the world turning its back and their own cost of living going through the roof. That's not a foreign policy problem anymore. That's a kitchen table crisis. And those are the ones that change presidencies. So where does this go? Let me walk you through what I think we're looking at, because there are several roads ahead and not all of them lead somewhere good. First, other European nations could follow Spain's lead. If one more major ally restricts airspace or base access, you're looking at a logistical nightmare. Longer flight routes, higher operational costs, and a shrinking map of cooperation. Every closed door makes the next one easier to shut. Second, the administration could double down on economic threats. We've already seen the trade ultimatum against Spain. But here's the thing about coercion between allies. It works once, maybe. After that, it accelerates exactly the kind of European strategic independence that undermines American influence for a generation. Third, and this is where I hold some cautious hope, there's a diplomatic track forming. Pakistan is reportedly hosting regional discussions. Iran's embassy in Spain signaled Tehran might be receptive to Madrid's engagement on Strait of Hormuz transit. Those are small openings, but in diplomacy, small openings are how wars end. Fourth, and this is the scenario that keeps me up at night, escalation toward a ground operation. Iran has warned that American troops would be set on fire. 2,500 Marines have already arrived in the region. If this war moves from airstrikes to boots on the ground, without Allied support, without clear legal authority, and without a credible exit strategy, we are looking at something that could define American foreign policy for decades in the worst possible way. Here's what I believe is most likely: a messy combination of all of these. Diplomatic damage accumulating faster than military objectives are achieved. Oil prices continuing to climb. Allied trust continuing to erode. And the window for a negotiated resolution getting narrower every day. The math doesn't get better with time, it gets worse. So let me leave you with this, because at the end of the day, what's happening with Spain, what's happening across Europe, what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, and at kitchen tables all across America, it all comes back to one question. And it's not a military question. It's not even really a political question. It's a question about identity. What kind of country do we want to be? Now look, I've been in rooms where the decisions are hard, and the information is incomplete, and the pressure is enormous. I know what it feels like to weigh the safety of Americans against the judgment of the world. And I will say plainly, there are legitimate security concerns about Iran. Reasonable people can disagree about what the right approach looks like. I'm not standing here pretending this is simple, because it's not. But here's the honest truth. The way America wages war matters just as much as whether America wages war. When we lead through persuasion, when we build coalitions grounded in shared sacrifice and mutual respect, when we operate within the frameworks of international law and institutional trust, we are strongest. Not because those things are easy, but because they are what separates leadership from domination. And the world knows the difference. Spain knows the difference. What we are witnessing right now is what happens when that distinction collapses. When allies close their skies to you, when the world says, "Not our war," when your own people start asking why the cost of groceries is going up to fund a conflict nobody else believes in, that is not a sign of American strength. That is a warning. Let me tell you something. I have seen America correct course before. We did it after Vietnam, when we rebuilt our military and our credibility through patience and diplomacy. We did it after Iraq, when we acknowledged hard truths about intelligence failures and the limits of unilateral action. It wasn't easy either time. It required humility, it required honesty, and it required leaders in both parties who were willing to put the country's long-term interests above short-term political wins. We've got to remember, America is not strong because we have the biggest bombs or the longest reach. We are strong because at our best, other nations choose to stand beside us. They choose it. And the moment we start forcing that cooperation through threats and coercion, we have already lost something more valuable than any military objective. So I'm calling on leaders of both parties, in Congress, in the administration, in every state house and every community, to demand a genuine strategy, one that includes our allies at the table, not as an afterthought, one that respects international law not as a constraint, but as the foundation of the order we built and led for 70 years, and one that has a credible, honest path to peace. Because winning a war without winning the peace is not winning at all. I learned that the hard way. Every president does. America has the capacity to get this right. We have the institutions, the talent, the history, and the values to lead the world, not through commands, but through conviction. The question, and it is the only question that really matters right now, is whether we will have the wisdom and the humility to do it again before it's too late. I believe we can, but believing isn't enough. We've got to act, and we've got to act together.